Welcome to this amazing space that we are in today, and I hope it translates well for our online audience who are joining us as well on Zoom. Welcome. I'm Joyce Seitzinger. I'm going to be your host today on behalf of Paramount Online, where I work as Digital Experience Director. Before we get started, obviously we have some important decisions to make on the 14th of October. And in supporting that, I would like to spend just a moment for an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university and of our industry partners today. I respectfully acknowledge your ancestors and elders past, present, and future. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia, where we and our audience conduct our business. So we are thrilled to have you all join us today for this discussion on the business case for embracing the green revolution. A big welcome to those in the room who have actually traveled IRL in real life to join us at Thank You's beautiful inside store. I really like the fact that so many people showed up early so that you had time to do a little bit of a tour. And if you got here a little bit late, make sure that you stay after the event to just have a little bit of a tour. It's here until the end of Sunday, close of business Sunday. Yeah. So if you're online, you've still got time to pop in on the weekend and come and visit. So we are joined, the 55 or so of us here are joined at home with over 500 of our wonderful students, industry partners, and colleagues. So this event will go beyond where we are today. A little bit of housekeeping. Exit, pretty obvious, it's right behind you. There will be an opportunity for audience questions at the end. So if there's anything that pops up for you, please keep it in mind. If you do need the bathrooms, they are just over in Emporium. So just up the street and into Emporium. For those at home, please feel free to use the chat function to say hi to everyone on Zoom so you can have your own conversations there. And we'll be monitoring the chat there also for questions, and those will be passed through to our panelists at the end of the conversation. Now, today's discussion has never been more important. You only need to turn on the news every day to see the impact of climate change and rising inflation. But even in that climate of rising inflation, consumers are still willing to pay more for products that do good. With a Nielsen IQ study finding that 78% of consumers say that a sustainable lifestyle is important to them, and they are willing to contribute to that and take action. So how do we create a level of urgency and pressure for companies to adopt these practices and technologies? Who is doing it well, and what businesses can we learn from? And what future, this is the question for you, what future could we reimagine if we embraced ESG strategies? So introducing our panelists who are going to help us answer some of these questions. We've got Daniel Flynn, who is the co-founder and managing director of one of Australia's most successful startups, Thank You. And we are in their beautiful space today. And they have the compelling vision to see a world where not one person lives in extreme poverty. Amazing. And Thank You collaborated with us on our sustainability course, which is available to basically share these skills that people need in order to, support the next generation of champions in sustainability. So thanks for hosting us in your space today. Yeah. Amanda Vukovic is our next panelist. She's the Director of Sustainability and Climate Change at Deloitte, who were another contributor to the sustainability course, which is great. And Deloitte's sustainability practice provides advisory services to clients from not-for-profit to large ASX-listed and multinational firms, as well as in the government sector. Welcome, Amanda. And our final panelist, Andrew Davies, who is the CEO of B-Lab Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand. And in that role, Andrew is responsible for leading the strategy and growth of the B Corp community and movement in this region. So welcome, Andrew. All right. Well, let's get started. And first of all, we wanted to kind of look at the business case for why. And I might get started with you, Daniel.
Sure.
The all-important why. Why should individuals care about ESG and sustainable practices? And why should businesses care? Big one.
Big one. Awesome. Wow. Again, thank you everyone to making it in the room. I feel like if you're in the room or online, we've all already woken up to this idea that how we live can drastically impact the world for good or for bad. And so I think the why for me comes back to because we should reimagine a world that doesn't have the same issues and darkness that the current world has. There are challenges we face from an environmental and social perspective that, you know, could be changed if we lived different. And so I think as individuals, the why, it's driven about a vision for a better world, but for business, it's the role we each play and the role we can play, I think, is remarkable. And we've seen a glimpse of that through the thank you lens, but then we've seen what others have done. These simple decisions that you can make in business that aren't just about keeping customers or engaging staff or, you know, keeping different perspectives in society happy. It's actually about the good you can do in the world. So I think the reason why is because we owe it to the next generation. So yeah, I'll kick off there.
Thank
See where
you.
we go.
Amanda and Andrew, anything you want to add to that?
I love the sentiment that you expressed there, Daniel, of we need to, but also we can. And I think that's a really powerful lesson for businesses to recognize that you can do business differently and have a positive impact. We've passed that hurdle, this idea that, well, business is what business is and it just needs to do what it does and make money and stay out of the way. We passed that some time ago.
Yeah.
So I think a combination of we need to change, and in the business world, the why is because you can. You can have a lot of it.
Yeah. Amanda, what specific benefits do you think businesses can expect to see by integrating ESG principles into their operations and strategies? And can they contribute to long-term profitability or shareholder value?
Thank you. I think there's a lot of benefits of integrating ESG into your strategies and operations. I think it's really important that the strategy aligns with your business model. It shouldn't be something that sits to the side. It should form part of every decision that you're making. And I think the benefits that we see in the business world is retaining and attracting top talent. I think also from an investor perspective, we're seeing integrating ESG into your investment decision making is showing greater returns. And to your point earlier, Joyce, we have seen a study that has shown that in the super and wealth space, 35% of people, as part of a survey that was done, said that they'd be willing to take a cut to the return in the event that it was invested in an E or S or G product or service. And I think that's really telling around where the market is going. And so I think it's really important to have an impact, but then also businesses are seeing that there's financial benefits as well, which is definitely encouraging them to jump on board.
Brilliant. Andrew, you are here as CEO of B-Lab Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand. You drive the growth of the B Corp movement. Perhaps for those people who are unaware of B Corp movement or would like a short explainer, maybe a short explainer, and then if you could elaborate on who some of the standout businesses are that have excelled in implementing sustainable practice and what other businesses could learn from them.
So I'll definitely give you the brief version.
Brief.
Complex. It's a simple concept, but a complex process. But B Corps are businesses that meet very high standards of social and environmental performance and make binding commitments to be accountable and transparent. And at B-Lab, we run a check, a verification process on performance against our standards. So that's where the certification component comes in. The examples of high performers, there's B Corps across every industry. There's 7,000 globally, 600. We just passed 600 in our part of the world last week, which is really exciting. And those businesses turn over about $15 billion in revenue every year. So it's a big community of business in a sense, but it's also a small number compared to the whole economy. The high performers, look, there are different kinds. So many of you will be familiar globally with businesses like Patagonia, who have been a long time leader, and they're a great example of the power of consistently showing up and designing your business around this idea of being accountable. Locally, we've seen the emergence of new businesses with really mission-led. So they've been designed to solve a problem. They're businesses like Keep Cup, working in the disposable or against the disposable coffee cup concept in creating reusable coffee cups. Got businesses like Outland Denim that have really tackled slavery throughout their supply chain and have come up with some innovative, really challenging solutions, but then also found themselves looking at the environmental impact of the fabrics that they use. So they've really tackled multiple problems in their value chain in the fashion sector. And then we've got businesses like Who Gives a Crap. We're a great example of a mission-led business that really is driven to create solutions for sanitation in the developing world by donating 50% of their profits to those causes. So they're businesses that have been designed to solve specific problems. And we also have businesses like Australian Ethical, a well-known superannuation fund who've been really a leader and an innovator in the ethical investment space, who are one of our highest performers, not necessarily through the environmental lens, because they're an office-based business, but through the way in which they really interrogate genuine ethical investment practice. They hold themselves to account, and they're constantly lifting the bar in terms of what constitutes ethical investment. They've developed new ways to screen and really try and financially empower people. So different examples of businesses. I think the other common theme, it would be impossible not to acknowledge a business like Thank You as well. There is literally around us an incredible story of a business that has tried to hold itself accountable in ways that has actually forced it to completely redesign what it does. And that kind of story of business is common in the B Corp community as well. And it's really, for me, the temptation is to focus maybe a little bit too much on the environment. And there are some businesses doing incredible things in terms of managing their footprints. But there's a broader purpose to the idea of what is our impact. You need to have an idea of what do we want to do with our business and how do we hold ourselves accountable. And I think Thank You is just one of the leading stories there as well.
If you had to think about what other businesses can learn from them, the people that did pivot or the people that started to hold themselves accountable, what would be some small ways that people could start?
I'll give you a big one.
Okay.
And I'll give you probably the simple, most powerful one, and that is to have a purpose.
Yeah.
Businesses started off with a purpose. It's really only in the last 50 years that this idea, which we talk about as really being the source code error in modern capitalism, this idea that a business exists to provide shareholder return is so corrosive. Yeah. The first thing you can do is articulate why you're in business. And it has to be bigger than you. And there's lots of smarter people than me that articulate this. Writers like Simon Sinek does a great job, and Tim Duggan up in Sydney has wrote a beautiful book about this. So find and articulate a clear purpose and use that as your true north, because you will constantly need to redesign your business to meet this evolving landscape of ESG. But what really keeps you focused is that purpose. So if you start anywhere, start there.
That's a great segue. Thank you, because Daniel, obviously this is something that your organization, Thank You, it already did. Your whole brand was created around water bottles, and then you later went on to cut those out entirely. How important, building on what Andrew said already, how important is it for brands to have that humility and adaptability to be able to pivot? And can you share a little bit about how you went, to go about enacting that? How did you get your organization turned around?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in the early days, I think a lot of people thought we were a bottled water company because they saw Thank You Water, and that was our first product. But behind that, if you were talking to us, this was a mission-led company, which almost feels like it shouldn't be in the same sentence as bottled water. So we'll get to that in a second. But it's back in 2008, and for us, we saw these two extremes in our world. So we saw extreme poverty, which for us was a true north on how do we help end this, and how do we do that through consumer purchase. And bottled water was actually the most controversial product to start with, because we thought that the reflection on society is horrible. We shouldn't be buying this product. Back then, we spent $50 billion on bottled water globally. Today, even though none of us buy it, it's grown to $350 billion. And it's still one of the fastest growing categories, which is mind-boggling. But it's sort of the consumerism undertone of we say something, but what do we actually do? Now, we started there and we naively thought, it'd be pretty easy to have a sustainable bottle of water. At the time, there was a bit of work around biodegradability. And so we thought, cool, we'll just do that. And the thing for us is we weren't a bottled water company. We were mission and purpose led. And that led us to some really interesting conversations around that technology or that solution. When you really look at it from a full life cycle analysis, it's not better, it just sounds better. And so we could get like 95% of the room or even 98% of the room clapping. But those that understand sustainability and the full picture would say that's not better, that is arguably worse. And so over time, as the bottled water category for us grew and it grew, the solution wasn't there. And so then we had a conversation about, do we leave? And we got in this to help shift consumerism, not to sell more bottled water. And so we ended up exiting the category, which was a shock to retailers. We had a great product selling well, and we left millions of dollars on the table when we left. But for us, we saw the future of thank you in other categories. And in time, if we went back into water, it would have to be reimagined in a way that we think is more responsible for the way we consume product. So it was an interesting journey, lots of internal debates, and it wasn't a quick decision, partly because the bigger you get, the more money, the more risk, the more big conversations about purpose, actually.
Yeah.
And if we didn't have that at the core, bottled water would still be selling every day the way it was. So I think the purpose is that foundation.
Yeah. Amanda, that might be a good point for you to jump in on, during that process of kind of reinvention or maybe a reorientation, it can be difficult for businesses to strike a balance between achieving growth and maintaining that sustainability in their operations, right? You obviously went through that, Daniel. What are some strategies for managing that conflict between short-term profit goals and that long-term sustainability objective, and in pursuit of that purpose?
Yeah, there seems to be a common theme across what we're all saying around value and impact and purpose. And I think Daniel spoke to the flip of that around, well, actually, we're making a lot of money, but it didn't align to our values, so we're going to drop it. What we see with the clients that we work with, it's actually a bit of both. We're seeing a shift in that through looking at ESG or embedding ESG, you actually can have greater returns. So there's financial benefit in doing so. For organizations, when there's not, I think you have to look across your entire operations, your entire value chain, and work out, well, where are those gaps and what's driving those gaps? Is it our customers? What stakeholders? I think that's really critical, because then you can try and bridge some of those gaps if you can identify what is driving those consumer behaviors, for example. But we're definitely seeing a shift, and I know I said to both of you, I work in the financial services space a lot. We're seeing a real shift in companies seeing the financial benefits of actually doing so. It's not just to feel good about yourself or for your organization or for your brand and reputation or for retaining staff like we talked about. It's actually bringing financial returns, and therefore there are benefits. But in the event that they're not, I think you have to look at what's driving those gaps.
Yeah. And Andrew, you recently spoke about green hushing. I was familiar with greenwashing, not green hushing, but many organizations holding back or saying less for fear of being labeled greenwashers because they may not have picked the right strategy or the right approach. Why do you think transparency is important when we're talking about that progress and being more transparent about the challenges that organizations face when they get stuck into this process?
Look, the easiest way to avoid green hushing is to do what's not really a new thing, a new obligation on business, and that's to tell the truth. But I think we all have a role in this conversation. We expect businesses to be perfect. As consumers, we look for bold claims that are infallible, and then we love to have a go at a company that fails. So I think everybody needs to interrogate this expectation. Why are businesses feeling like they need to come out with such big claims? There's something good in that. There's a rising expectation of consumers and investors. What we've seen in the big corp world is that the businesses that get the best storytelling and the best engagement and support are actually the ones that talk about problems that they haven't solved yet, which is incidentally also the best antidote to greenwashing, is talk about what you haven't done well yet. It's really challenging for businesses to do, but it's the way that you get the support from your people who work in the business as well. Will be much more interested in what are the problems that you're trying to solve, but as well as your consumers and your investors should be a lot more interested in that. That's where transparency comes in. Ultimately, you need to build mechanisms into your business that enable you to be transparent, because that's where you're holding yourself to account. And I think it's really interesting to recognize that there is a system at play here. Most people who are running businesses are getting up in the morning looking to have a fulfilling job and do good work. But there is a system at play here that does make it hard for businesses to be transparent, to hold themselves accountable, to resist the lure of pressure that includes us as consumers who are looking for businesses to only make the boldest claims. Unfortunately, in the modern world, there's less and less room for nuance, but this is what business needs to have the courage to do, is have the conversation and be transparent about what they're not comfortable and what they're not good at yet. That's the real superpower of a business now.
Yeah. Who would be some examples of brands that, besides Thank You, who are doing that really well, that providing that transparency?
Look, I mean, without being too self-serving, go look at the B Corp community directory. They're all required to be transparent.
Yep.
Their results for their assessment that they go through are all published transparently. But then I think you can look at some of the brand leaders, including businesses like Patagonia, who've got a great track record globally of accepting that they need to keep evolving. And when they make a mistake, they need to be accountable for it. They'll voluntarily seek out or even create new standards that they can then try and stick to. So I think that there's a really interesting conversation emerging around the idea that who we do business with is just as important as what we do inside businesses. And I think it's so many businesses are grappling with that simple idea of what does good look like and how do we get there? But it is, this is Patagonia comes back to an example of a business that's been talking for a long time. And when it gets called out, this is what you haven't done well enough. They're the first ones to say, wow, yep, let's dive into that and have a look.
It feels like we're moving backwards. I think there is a lot of fear to be bold, and it's not even what you disclose on your websites or in your reports, it's also what you say. So there are current litigation cases where on panels, people representing companies have said things which at the time the data supported that, and that's getting held, ASIC are holding individuals accountable. And I think that's creating fear in the industry. And we've definitely seen a lot of organizations stripping all their products off their websites until they do greenwashing assessments to be 100% certain that it's correct. And we were talking about how we don't want companies to feel like they have to be absolutely perfect before they go public, because we're just going to take steps backwards in this world, which is what we don't want. So we're definitely seeing fear in the marketplace around what individuals and companies are disclosing.
Yeah. Thanks for those insights, but we don't want to scare people off of getting engaged with this. Well, but I can see that it's an absolute challenge.
Yeah.
And I think that the pressure from consumers is not going away either.
Yeah.
So I think the real challenge for businesses is to accept that it might be more difficult. I would argue that's probably a good thing. It's good that the regulators are engaging and taking interest in this space. It should result in the true leaders, the businesses that have the backup to their claims are the ones that are good to go. But yeah, I agree that from a system perspective, the last thing we need is this kind of withdrawal to where we've only got the true high performers and everybody else is kind of sitting back going, it's too hard.
Yeah.
So I think that's also about recognizing intent. You know, a business that's out there trying to be better, they're high performers as well.
Yep. How do you think that corporate Australia stacks up with our global counterparts, Andrew?
We have innovators and leaders in Australia and in many sectors, and including broadly ESG-led businesses. We also have an interesting investment sector where our superannuation funds have huge influence, and so many of them are articulating around responsible investment mandates, and that's a really positive influence. Perhaps to draw the distinction broadly in the US market, the investment sector is a little bit behind the management of companies. In some senses in Australia, we see the opposite. The investment sector is pushing businesses in a really positive way. So look, we have leaders here as much as anywhere else. We also have businesses that are operating at a global level coming out of Australia. And I think that's the value of a globalized market, is that we can scale from here, we can learn from here. So look, we're, as we like to often say, punching above our weight.
Amanda, you would concur? Excellent. Given the current state of our environmental crisis, how urgent do you think it is for business to have a large voice and responsibility in adopting sustainable practices and technologies? That's really a question to all of you.
I think it's important to have a loud voice on issues that are important to your business and resonate with your strategies and the issues that you're differentiating on. You can't have a loud voice on everything. And that is why, you know, ESG is such a broad topic in itself. It means a billion different things. And so I think it's important to have a really clear strategy, vision, mission, purpose, where you can be loud on certain issues, where you have the resources and capital and ability to create impact in those certain areas, because we can't be good at everything. So I think it's important more than ever, but to be really strategic in where you're going to have the loudest voice.
Now, I think to add to that, I think businesses are good at being loud, so they can do loud advertising, loud marketing. And I think one of the challenges and opportunities in this space, I think B Corp is a great example of providing a platform for this. But we can't just come out with quick handles that sound good to consumers, and because consumers buy into that. There's a lot of time, I think, needed and investment in not just are we saying the right thing, but like, are we approaching it in the right way? You know, I think, yeah, it's hard because things move in trends, like, you know, carbon neutral, like it's all, and there's an you know, an important journey in carbon, but just buying carbon credits to sort of right your wrongs is not the solution. And plastic free sounds amazing, but sometimes there are unintended consequences of the other solutions. And you know, thank you. We navigate this minefield all the time, consumer expectations, because people are quite loud on one topic. And I think it's just, the job is to think deeply and be loud, but off a good foundation. And I think we've got to look to frameworks that other people are providing versus trends.
And I think that Edelman's work here with their trust barometer is a really interesting piece of research that's been tracking this relative trust in institutions. And following the pandemic, there's been a long-term trend of rise in trust in business, which sometimes seems a little odd given some of the disastrous consequences we see, and a decline in trust in other institutions, including obviously government. The early pandemic, government popped up again, but then very quickly went down. The reality is that in our modern life, our business plays a huge role, very much as our employer as well. The people look to their businesses, both as consumers and workers, for lots more than just a wage. And I think this is one of the drivers why people in business are feeling this pressure to represent. And you're right, Daniel, sometimes you move too fast without doing the hard work of engaging your stakeholders and having the difficult conversations, you get called out. But not doing the work at all is not an option either. You need to be talking to your stakeholders, engaging with them. This idea of stakeholder engagement is really the underpinning of the next model of business that we're starting to see come through with the leaders. That's what enables you to sometimes be loud and fast and sometimes to be slow and considered. That's the superpower that businesses need to adopt. But look, we still see it. We still see the tropes come out when businesses are called out. Business needs to stick to making money. Business needs to stay out of social issues, as if social issues don't impact people in business in some weird way. You know, those things still come out at points of pressure, and they're often when businesses have got something a little bit wrong. To me, that's again a really interesting friction at the moment. I think we'll look back at this time as more than just interest in ESG or sustainability. We'll look at it at a fairly significant repositioning of the role of business in our lives.
Perhaps a little bit more aspirational then. If we get this right, what future might we be able to reimagine, and what sort of transformative change could we see if, you know, these ESG principles are fully embraced by businesses and communities? Who's willing to share their dream?
I think it was important how you said earlier, it can't all be doom and gloom. And you know, a lot of the work we do, it can sometimes feel like that. So what would the world look like?
Better. We'll start there. A bit better. Yeah.
I heard someone frame this the other day in a really interesting way, which is in the context of the climate challenge. We talk a lot about the goals that we need to achieve, and they're often framed around within temperature ranges and constraining emissions in order to limit the temperature rise on average. It's a really interesting thing to imagine. What does success look like here? We're all confronted by the challenges of this right now. If we've managed to constrain emissions and climate change it will be because we've reorganized how we operate, particularly through the lens of business. Success looks like businesses being very much interconnected with their stakeholders and accountable to them. I don't think we'll be reporting on how much money we made in the last quarter. I think we'll be reporting on how much impact we've had. I don't think we'll be assessing businesses against each other through stock markets that simply focus on those simple financial metrics. I think baked into even our value exchanges like stock exchanges, there will be a trade in businesses around their impact. And that might seem a little crazy, but there are already exchanges being developed in the world that are exactly that. There are already reporting regimes coming in that require businesses to be transparent about their impact. There are already mechanisms that start to weigh up a business's financial performance based on its environmental and social impact. It's a little bit like what I loved about the 2040 film. The technologies are here. We just need to organize ourselves. And in the business world, the business models are here. The regimes of governance are here. The regulations are here. We just haven't quite organized them in a systemic way. So to me, that's success. It's a really different construct of how we do business, but it builds on exactly what we're seeing today.
It's a little bit that William Gibson quote of the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet.
Yeah, love that.
So from that, so I've got two questions for all of you. One will take us into a government direction, one into the individual. Let's go individual first. So everyone here, I love the duality that you spoke of like everyone here, we are usually part of a business, but we are also a consumer. So as a consumer, what is kind of like, what is a way to start, changing your mindset and does it also start with purpose? Do you try to tackle everything, as you mentioned, ESG is a really complex set of principles and areas to start. So for the consumer, what is a way to kind of reorient yourself and get started in forming your mindset?
I think like starting point one is the realization. As a consumer, you do hold more power than you realize. And I think as an individual, this is often the challenge. We think, look, I look at my weekly grocery bill, annual bill, it's not that big, but combined it is. And so I think when you wake up to, and collectively we have this $63 trillion a year we're consuming, that's our collective consumption. I used to think the world should be fixed by the few billionaires who can fix it. But collectively we can...
They're not great at it.
Your words on camera, but I think we together can do a lot more. And as a consumer, when you wake up to the choices I make, they make a direct impact, but the onflow to others around me and the influence I have is remarkable. And so when you do wake up to that, then you look for B Corp, you look for brands that are mission-led, purpose-led, but it starts first with it matters.
Yeah.
Versus it doesn't really matter. I think that's a starting point.
It's important to shift that mindset. I think we all think our individual contribution isn't actually going to make a difference, where, as you said so well, it's collectively we will. I had a client ask me recently, we were talking about greenwashing in the financial services space, and they said, what's coming out in the clothing sector, like what are we seeing, who's holding brands to account? There's these big bold statements around sustainability or how things are ethically being purchased through supply chains. Who's checking this? And I thought that was such a great question. I didn't know the answer, so if anyone else does, that'd be amazing. But I think we all have a responsibility to educate ourselves around what are we purchasing and make conscious decisions around our decision making, and whether I often say we can't do it all, but we can change certain things in our life, whether it's what supermarkets we shop at, what clothing stores we shop at, what cleaning products we use to make a difference.
What they said.
Okay. A question then, in pivoting to, the larger collective action, our governments, what is the role of government influence here? What is the role of government action here?
Or lack of.
Or yes.
I think the financial service sector has had a huge role to play in driving the climate transformation in the absence of any real government legislation prior to a new government coming in. It's been really poor. And so I think the business world has been trying to bridge the gap under poor previous governments that we've had. But I'll stop there because I could talk about that for a while.
Catch her after
Yeah.
the talk. I'm also thinking about things like, for instance, the happiness index. Andrew, I remember that when Jacinta Ardern was in Aotearoa, she was, moving the country in that direction of having a different way of measuring its own success.
Yep.
Yes.
And there's real power in that. And it's interesting to see the current government exploring a wellbeing budget and starting to really assess that. It makes so much sense when you think about it. As a country, our GDP has grown. What does that mean for anybody here?
Yeah.
Whereas if we're measuring our well-being, it's so much more relatable and understandable. So I think there's real power in that. I think that government, by definition, in terms of regulation and the requirements on business, they'll always be behind. I think lately they've been particularly behind. So it's encouraging that that's changing. But there also needs to be a role for government to stare down the business interests that will say, no red tape, you can't slow us down. We won't innovate if there's rules and regs, which is absolute rubbish. We see it all the time. And B Corps are another good example. They voluntarily take on an enormous set, what effectively it's like voluntary regulation. We're going to try and meet all these standards and hurdles. And then we're going to ask you guys to hold us to account, and we don't make it easy. So I think that regulation is always important, but it will be a lagging indicator. Regulation follows leadership in business, and that's okay. That's the system. But then the other one is government always has a role to play in that long-term direction setting. So really that business craves consistency. Investment looks for stable markets. Government has a real role to play in terms of that long-term stability and direction setting.
Yeah. We will go to audience questions just after the next question, so be sure to be ready to engage with our panelists. My final question to you then is, what words of encouragement would you have to either a consumer, an organization, or a government?
Just start. I think there's a hesitancy to, if we're not 100%, we're not going to do anything. And it's like, just start, give it a go. Do it wrong, and that's okay. Start again.
Yeah, I think this is the new normal. It is consumer expectation, employee expectation, shareholders, investors are shifting their view. Billionaires are, some are leading the way, some are working on it, but this is the new normal. And so we just need to adapt, be aware, and continue to educate ourselves better on the path forward.
I would just say be curious. There's always a better way to do what you do. Find that leadership in other businesses. Be curious about why people are holding you to account, what their interests are. Curiosity is a superpower as well.
Right. So just start, educate yourself, and be curious. Excellent.
Little plug for RMIT there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Educate yourself.
Yeah.
With our new sustainability course. Thank you. So questions from the audience. I've just been absolutely riveted, so I haven't been paying attention. Yes, please.
The role of out of RMIT, inspired to have meaning and purpose in their lives, and it's hard to get that first job, hard enough to get the first job. How do you kind of keep that search for meaning and you just I don't know, do you have any advice on that real first job phase?
I might just repeat that for the people on Zoom. So how might young people retain their purpose and that meaning that they leave the university with and bring that into their first role? Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting challenge because your first job or that first step you take, you're needing things like pay, experience, a whole bunch of things, and there's a lot of things to weigh up. But going back to, Andrew, what you said at the beginning around purpose, it's important for organizations to figure it out. I think it's important for individuals to figure it out. And even if you can't articulate it, to still use this feeling or sense you have of purpose as your decision-making step. And that may mean you're not taking the highest paid role because you're like, actually, this more aligns with my values. Or maybe you are taking that role because the organization doesn't align with your values, but you think, actually, I think I could change this. And I think here's how we could change it. And so then, both may be the right path. It's not always that or that. But having that as your anchor is really, really, really critical.
Yeah, and just keep learning too. I mean, I think I won't give you my boring life story, but it certainly wasn't a huge impact focused career for a long time. But I think you learn as you go, and the reality is you can learn a lot from working in different organisations that might not on the face of it be what you consider to be values aligned or mission aligned, but you learn as you go, and you can build along it. There's a lot of, I think, pressure on young people driven by a keen sense of the climate crisis that we have to solve problems now. Yes, we do, but you've also got a long career in front of you.
Mm. Yeah. And I'll also just add that at Deloitte and in professional services, when we get people from courses like RMIT, we always say they're the brightest and they're much smarter than all of us who have been at the organization forever. And so it's not this view that if you're a young person joining the organization that you have to learn off the people who have been there for 10 plus years. We actually lean in and say, you've come straight from these courses. What have you learned? How can you do things differently? And they have all these great ideas, especially around technology, of how it can be more efficient. So I think we have so much to learn from our young people coming into the organization, not just the other way around.
Fantastic. Over here.
Hi.
Hi.
I work for Manifest Australia Red Cross, and so contribute to the your amazing social impact sustainability course that my son is now studying.
Oh, fantastic.
Segue. So the Red Cross, our currency is trust, but we're always right at the top of Edelman and Australian Midship Index, etc., etc. And we have built that trust over 160 years, and we're auxiliary partners with government, and so trust is absolutely foundationally important to us. We do have access to scale. Biggest humanitarian organisation in the world, working in 191 countries, 20,000 volunteers, just in Australia, etc., etc. And I'm going to look at you, Daniel, because I worked on the Oxfam Thank You partnership many moons ago. Yeah. Where is the opportunity for civil society and not-for-profit organisations, including the big, the big organisations who are very careful about trust and about brand? Where are the genuine opportunities for us to collaborate together that go beyond what we've already been doing? Like, what do we need to do differently? Because, the existential climate crisis needs us to collaborate in innovative ways to achieve scale and to kind of break out of our niches and silos. Yeah.
Wow, good question. Okay, so reframing, and for our online audience, where are the opportunities for really large brands and organizations that have a long history and have achieved scale already, like the Red Cross? Where are the opportunities for the collaboration between new and emerging organizations in order to achieve scale? Achieve scale more quickly and impact more quickly.
What a challenge! I think it's a challenging question because we, and there are many answers to this, but from our kind of background, we traditionally funded bigger organizations with our profits. So more known, built trust over many years, decades, or over 100 years. And I think we work with a lot of different groups now who I would say are smaller, but they are very much pushing innovation and pioneering, which carries risk because things can fail. And so I think it's the great challenge to a big organization with great trust and great history is like, well, how do we be innovative? How do we fail? And what is the highest calling? Is it maintain trust or take a risk for mission? And like there's a tension between both. And I think how does this work? I think smaller organizations need to take a risk and work with bigger organizations. It might be like, well, that's the old model. Well, no, you need to take a risk, and thank you. In our history, we've done that. In the same way, there's a risk both ways. And I think we just have to take risks both ways. In the early days and these are years ago, the world's changed now, but knocking on some of the big doors, it was always, risk, too much risk. And in those early days, we just wanted to give money, which was an interesting journey. But I think that's the challenge. The challenge is to the Red Crosses of the world, to government, and to smaller organizations to take risks because the world needs change. And it means that we're going to fail and learn along the way. Just that.
Any further thoughts?
Not on that one.
Hey. Hey.
Yeah, thanks. Great discussion today. Thanks so much for your insights. We talked a lot about business strategy and mission and purpose, brand and marketing message. There's a lot of sort of decisions and activity that come out of the C-suite. We've also talked a bit about consumers as well, rightly. I guess I'm interested in another stakeholder group, which is sort of employees, including frontline employees. And the question is, what literacy or fluency do broader workforces need to have in kind of the areas or domains around ESG in order to drive sort of impact against those things? And sort of what is the role of employers in helping kind of drive that?
So what is the role of employers in driving the literacy and fluency in ESG for employees? Because they can be a positive force. Yes, thanks.
It's a great question. I'll have a first stab and then please jump in. I think the ISSB standards that I'm sure we're all familiar with in this room is going to drive all people across the enterprise to have enough of an understanding to be able to communicate what you're doing in the ESG and sustainability space. We ran a session with the large banks in Australia, and one of the biggest fears that they're facing at the moment is how are we going to educate at scale all of our customer-facing employees around these topics where historically they've never had to think about it. How can we get our finance people to now understand what the climate-related financial risks are and how are they going to report that in their financial statements? So there is a big challenge for organisations at the moment. And I think RMIT and others are thinking about how can we create courses or skill certain groups of people, the C-suites and boards being one of them, who there's a huge capability uplift that's required across all sectors to educate them at scale to be able to respond and to avoid greenwashing at the same time. So it's something that all of our clients who we're working with are grappling with, and they're trying to get their non-typical ESG or sustainability people into courses to train them in areas that they've never had to, and also changing their mindset around this is not an extra thing that I have to do where I'm not getting paid for it on top of my day job. It's actually, we all have a responsibility across your organisation to be well versed in this, and if you don't, you're going to be left behind.
I'll give a more detailed answer in a sense. I was up at Cape Byron Distillery a couple of days ago. Pretty good place to visit, actually. They're a B Corp, and they've just developed a technology to ship gin in large plastic containers into bars, because there's this terrible thing in bars where you ship bottles of gin in glass and they use it, half a dozen bottles in a night and then just chuck it out. The glass recycling is more complicated than it looks. So they figured out a way to put some glass bottles in bars, ship the gin in a big container, but they had to figure out how to still make the container square and so the bar people could pick it up because it's quite heavy. It's a lot of gin. Anyway, the point of the story is there's no way they could have solved that without having deep relationships with the people in the warehouse who had to figure out how to put a plastic bulk thing inside a cardboard thing and still be able to pick it up, and really practical stuff like that. And I think that the reality of so much of the work in the broad sustainability area is around that kind of detail. So it's all a business thing. We've seen business employ people in the sustainability area increasingly from a chief sustainability officer down. And the first thing they realise, if it's not already apparent to them, is that they need to be across the entire business. It's not a vertical, it's a horizontal job and career. So we see that in those examples all the time where people figure out the solutions are really complex. And then we also see that back in the communication space. I walked past ESOP on the way here today. Beautiful classic Australian brand and B Corp. They've got the word yes in their window. Nice and clear. I walked in and I said, wow, this is fantastic. You're for yes. And the people behind the counter had a beautiful conversation about it. Empowering people at that level to talk about a social issue like that is really challenging work, but it's absolutely critical to you as a business being credible. So yeah, it has to be a whole of business proposition.
I think too, not underestimating the role that every employee carries. Like we're in this store right now because someone at Emporium who wasn't the final decision maker, but they were not even in the right department, to be honest, but they were like, yes, no, I know about the future of the vision here that Emporium and Vicinity have, and I know thank you's vision, we're going to find a way. And they just like on the inside were that internal visionary, and eventually everyone loved it, but sometimes it takes people everywhere to spot something and not just wait for someone somewhere to make a call. So we've seen a lot of that in Thank You's history.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. That's a great story. Jenny, do we have any questions from our online audience?
Yes, what's been from my side? First is how important is the penalty the role of a policy framework on the Commonwealth level for establishing effective business reporting mechanisms? And do you think we will see mandatory reporting of ESG beyond that?
So how important, can you repeat it, please?
Important to be the role of a policy framework on the Commonwealth level?
Okay.
And will we see it as mandatory?
All right. How important is a reporting policy framework from a Commonwealth level?
Feels like one for you, Amanda.
I know, I can feel you both looking at me.
I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
But I feel like you would.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. I think absolutely having a standard around reporting. We're seeing more and more frameworks and standards coming in. I think what is important is to not overwhelm people with too many, and I think that's what the ISSB is trying to do, consolidate all of these frameworks that are out there and to create baselines. So I think as long as it can be understood, picked up, not replicating something else that already exists, then absolutely all for it. 2 thumbs up.
And history is pretty instructive here. Before the Great Depression, there were really no financial standards at all. Businesses could report their profit any which way. And that was one of the key contributors to a spectacular stock market bubble. After that, we figured out, hey, we should actually be a little bit consistent when we talk about profit. And we developed a whole bunch of rules around that. And that's a whole norm that we just accept now. The idea of introducing more consistent reporting around sustainability is absolutely not difficult. And very necessary.
We've done it already. It's just aiming that at another area. Yeah, great.
One follow-up on that is what can governments achieve through embracing
Sorry?
What can governments achieve through embracing ESG strategies?
What can governments achieve through embracing ESG strategies?
They could save a bunch of money. It's slightly crazy that we socialize the harm that business does and just pick up the bill. So changing some of those standards, harm minimization, right? Stop the harm in the first place and you don't have to spend as much money fixing it.
Seems like a big one.
It's good.
Yeah. Sorry. Another question. Yes.
Thanks for the session. And I love how we started the session with being centered on purpose and values. I think the world will be a better place if all have that today. I guess I'm curious about bridging the philosophical part and the pragmatic part. And the context is the current economic situation. So, for example, the World Economic Forum has just released their top 10 priorities for all members around the world, and cost of living and profitability has went back up to number 1 and 2. Displacing climate change and biodiversity. So, and in the context where the cost of living has increased, high interest rates, things are not easy for many people out there. So, I guess my question to the panel is, number 1, have you seen this trend in the past year, where people are going back to basics, when the past the wine will more than I guess people first? And my question number 2 is what have you been doing and what can we do to still maintain or increase the momentum while remaining true to those goals?
So so there's a tension between the philosophy of this and the pragmatism, and currently in the current environment, people might be taking a step back just because of the pressures. So what have you seen But have you seen that happening, and what will be some ways to counter that?
We've seen a thank you straight away. Consumer sentiment and what people will pay for on shelf. It's a pretty quick read, and it's a very uncomfortable journey, because deep down we all want to do good, but if it costs more, and so at thank you, we've definitely felt a lot of the pressure, and a lot of brands have, because you can buy a cheaper product. And it's a very hard reality for us. So right now, one of our solutions, and I think the role is to be nimble, fast, and innovate. Just behind you, there is a 3-liter bottle of hand and body wash and a universal cleaner. So that's the first 3-liter in supermarkets in Australia. And this does two things from a sustainability perspective. It does lower waste. It reduces the number of lids, which are in many cases not recyclable, reduces carbon. We've looked at the impact of that. It's better, but also from a cost perspective, if you bought that, your price per 100 ml is actually very, very cost effective compared to the rest of the market, if not better. So that is one of our solutions, but the challenge is you still have to pay for it, and it's 3 liters. And so it's a risk. So right now the supermarkets are taking a risk putting that on because it's a lot of shelf space. We're taking a lot of risk. This is a gentle encouragement for everyone to go buy a 3-liter. but like the pragmatic side is literally like, this is too much risk, because if it doesn't sell, we're left with the cost of the whole little idea, right? And it's a real challenge. So I think when you're mission led, you wake up and you read the new data and it is real, and then you go, cool, how do we innovate? How do we find a way around? Because the mission we're here for deserves it. Yeah.
I can say that I bought that.
This was not a plan, but that's cool. Thank you.
That because I see your products in lots of Airbnbs.
Yes.
I would have thought that would be great for Airbnbs who always need to
Such a good idea.
refill.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm not sure if anyone's done this, but we have this phenomenon. We know our product quite well, but sometimes you'll see it in a cafe or a beautiful place and you're like, yes. And then you go up and you're like, oh, thank you's changed to like a pink liquid that smells terrible. Yeah. So this is another challenge, and that's a price-based thing. And so the 3-liter isn't also designed to like, how do we meet a reality for a lot of businesses, which is they just can't afford it. So yeah, we're trying, but good, get the word out. It's good.
We will.
It's another example, though, of a role of government here to be thinking about how can we make life easier for businesses that are taking those risks. So what incentives can we put in place for larger bulk buy bottles? You're finding such a complex system there where the supermarket is saying, hey, we're all about shelf space, and this is a problem for us. I mean, I think the supermarkets here it's fascinating looking at their advertising switch. They're trying to be better, but they have those own metrics and drivers that influence them as well. So there's a role here for government to come in. And I think for me, in terms of you spoke about the philosophy in that question. In the 1950s, it was not good business to sack your workforce in large numbers to protect your bottom line. It just wasn't. There was no law against it. It just wasn't the done thing. So cultural norms can be really influential in terms of how we choose to do things. In the 70s and 80s, that became the first lever that you went for. This was the GE generation, the genius of Jack Welch and people like that, who would sack 12,000 people on a moment's notice because that became a really super bold thing to do. And I think we're seeing some conversations around those values that are shifting. That's really interesting. I don't have the answers in terms of how to shift those conversations necessarily to the mainstream, other than supporting the businesses that are being brave, that are doing things differently.
Wonderful. With that, I know everyone's just so riveted on this conversation. It's been absolutely brilliant. But with that, we have come to the end of today's event. So I would just like to take a moment to say thank you to the panel for engaging and taking the time to tackle what were some really big questions. We do have a small themed gift for each of you, which will be coming out. There we go. Fantastic. Thank you, Snita. We
Oh
are.
my gosh.
Thank
Thank
you. Let's take this to the football. Extra big thank you for hosting today's event in this wonderful space. As we mentioned earlier, for viewers at home, if you want to come in and take a look at this space, it's still open until close of business on Sunday. So come on down and check it out. And if you're interested in learning more about this topic, it's been mentioned a few times already. We have a 6-week credential in sustainability and social impact, 100% online, that will give you the skills and the fluency that was talked about today. So thank you very much to our audience online. Thank you, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.